Audio production brings you "'Twas the Nightmare on Christmas Eve" by J.J. Flores. The kids excitedly hung their stockings by the chimney. The snow outside the window was like glitter shining on the house, glowing in a thick, white mist. The decorations on the Christmas tree shone. The kids talked gleefully around the Christmas tree. Their names were Annie, Samuel, and Daniel. Nathaniel. "I believe in Santa Claus," said Samuel. "Do you guys?" he asked his brother and sister. Samuel grinned as Annie and Daniel said that they believed in Santa too. "Do you guys want to catch Santa?" "I have a plan," said Daniel. Annie and Samuel gave him blank stares. "Are you sure?" asked Annie. "It's tricky to catch him," Daniel said. "What is even your plan?" asked Annie. "Join me and find out," said Daniel, fussing with his reddish blonde hair. Samuel asked, "Annie, are you in on this plan?" "I don't know, it depends on what his plan is," said Annie. Okay. I will explain my plan when we are getting ready for bed," said Daniel. After Annie and Samuel nodded, they each headed into the kitchen. When they got into the kitchen, the clock on the counter near the back of the wall read 6:30 p.m. Mom, Melanie Nathaniel, was sitting at the table, her arms folded across her chest. She looked at the kids and got up off her chair. "Finally you're here," she said happily. "Who wants to bake some cookies?" Daniel and Samuel both shouted, "Yes please, yes please." Just because they noticed Annie slip away from the kitchen didn't mean the boys were going to slip away. She did this every year. She always made some excuse not to help make Christmas cookies on Christmas Eve. Just as Annie slipped away, the boys got ready to help Mom bake the Christmas cookies. They always put the sugar in the middle of their cookies to make it taste better. But Daniel barely accepted his batch of sugar to put in his batch of half-baked cookies. He was thinking, "OMG, can't I have a snowball fight with Annie?" Samuel obviously noticed something was up with Daniel, because his brother is always competitive about who can make the best, tastiest, most delicious sugar cookies in the whole wide world. But this year he wasn't. Giving Daniel a light tap on the shoulder, Samuel said, "Come on man, we're making cookies." Mom, like Samuel, noticed Daniel wasn't concentrating as hard as he usually did on Christmas Eve. Mom said, "We need to make these cookies for you kids and Santa." Daniel shook his head and started concentrating harder. When the cookies were baking in the oven, Daniel asked Samuel, "Want to go outside and have the greatest snowball fight ever?" Mom grinned at her two sons. "Good. I'm glad you're using your time wisely. Can I come out and see the snowball fight?" "Of course you can," said Daniel, grinning from ear to ear. "Just bring your phone, so I can see myself kick Samuel and Annie's butts." Okay. Samuel insisted that he could kick Annie and Daniel's butts in a snowball fight, but he also agreed to have Mom bring her phone. Samuel grinned at his brother's familiar competitiveness. "Come on Daniel, let's have a snowball fight." Outside, Mom was sitting on the patio with her camera raised, ready to record the snowball fight on Samuel's cue as the boys look for Annie. The boys have looked everywhere around their snow-covered yard. When they met up 5 minutes later, Daniel asked confusedly, "Where can Annie possibly be?" When the boys told Mom that Annie wasn't in the yard, Mom suggested she might be inside. Turns out Mom was right. Annie was found hiding behind a stack of gifts underneath the tree. Daniel had been the one to find Annie behind the tree. Although Daniel knew the answer, he asked, "What are you doing here?" When they got back into the kitchen 20 minutes later, the cookies were finally done. Samuel glared at Annie over his plate of half-decorated cookies. Daniel also glared. Annie knew why both boys were glaring at her as they all sat down to decorate their cookies. "Sorry, I should have not hid. Then you guys wouldn't have forfeited the snowball fight," Annie said apologetically. Both boys decided to forgive Annie. "You know," began Daniel as they were decorating their cookies, "our snowball fight wasn't cancelled on your behalf. Are we forgiven for blaming you?" Samuel apologized right after Daniel. Annie forgave them both immediately after. All three of them began chatting again as they continued drawing on their cookies with frosting and icing. Samuel showed Annie and Daniel one of his cookies. "Is that Santa?" said Daniel, staring questioningly at the red man. The man has a black belt striped onto his red suit, a white beard, with a big grin, rosy cheeks, and a red hat with what seemed to have a snowball attached to it. When Samuel shrugged and said, "Oh, I tried to make the decoration look like Santa," Annie squealed with delight and started asking for advice on how she could imitate his decoration. The moment they were done with their cookies, Mom walked into the kitchen with a huge tray. She gently removes their cookies off their plates and onto the tray. When they started helping Mom clean the table, Daniel shrugged and said, "I think I decorated more Christmas trees onto my cookies than Santa." When they all finished cleaning the kitchen, Samuel asked Mom what she would like on her Christmas wish list. Imagine Medusa freezes your house, so that everyone in the house has the look of stone. That's what happened in the Nathaniel's house. Everyone and everything seemed to freeze. Even the snow outside. Mom's eyes were huge and locked on the table. Daniel had his hand on the refrigerator door. His foot was in midair. And that foot didn't seem ready to come down. Annie's hand was halfway toward the trash can. As for Samuel, he felt terrible because it dawned on him, and everyone else, what Mom wanted. It was a Friday, July 14th, Daniel Nathaniel's birthday. Shortly 2 weeks after that, Fallon Nathaniel had been killed in an accident. Fallon and Melanie Nathaniel have been married for like literally 10 years. Even though the tragic blow happened to Fallon a year ago, Melanie said that there would always be a place in her heart for Fallon. Samuel wanted to break the tension in the air, so he quickly said, "Why don't we get the cookies ready for Santa?" That seemed to do it. Everyone unfroze from their frozen states, and everyone sighed with relief. Mom gave Samuel a hug and thanked him for changing the subject. She has been devastated ever since the death of Fallon. Annie put 4 cookies on a plate, Samuel put a glass of milk next to the plate for Santa, and Daniel got the carrots ready for the reindeer. After they were done setting down the cookies, milk, and carrots, Daniel whispered, "Okay, I'll tell you my plan to catch Santa when we get in bed." When they glanced at the clock, it read 8:50 p.m., which meant they only had about 5 minutes until bed. So they decided to group around the fire. That's what they always did on Christmas Eve. Mom was roasting marshmallows by a wood-burning stove. By the time the kids grouped around the fire, Mom handed out the marshmallows. Once they were eating, Daniel said, "You know what? I hope I am on the nice list this year. The fire makes the Christmas tree glow in an iridescent glow." "Yes," says Annie. "I sent in my Christmas wish list maybe 2 weeks ago. And I hope I am on the nice list this year." Mom grins at 8-year-old Annie, 7-year-old Samuel, and 9-year-old Daniel. "I think you all made the nice list this year," she said. They now have only 2 minutes left until bed. And they spend those 2 minutes going over what they want for Christmas. When it goes to Mom's turn, she is extremely fidgety and stares at the fire. The kids felt sad for her, because it was obvious she wanted Fallon Nathaniel back. When bedtime arrives, the kids ran towards their twin beds. Samuel and Daniel have to share one, while on the other hand, Annie gets to have a whole bed to herself. Mom comes upstairs and kisses each of her sons and her daughter goodnight and wish them good luck. She tells them she is sure Saint Nick put them on the nice list. 5 minutes later, after Mom's footsteps fade away, Samuel says to Daniel, "Come on, man. What is your plan?" Yeah, says Annie, climbing off her bed and getting onto Samuel and Daniel's bed. "What is your plan?" she and Samuel said together. Whoa, please calm down," begins Daniel. "First of all, this plan won't take action till midnight, and second of all, please wait." "Okay," said Annie, "since this plan won't take action till 12 p.m., can you at least tell us what is the plan?" Daniel sighs and shakes his head. "All right, you guys. I am not trying to get out of telling you the plan, but let me just ask you guys. Santa knows when we are awake and sleeping, and he won't come until we are sleeping, right?" 2 reluctant nods follow Daniel's words. "Well," Daniel says, "I'll just get my wristwatch and let you know when 12 p.m. strikes." "Wait," Annie says, "I will let you know when 12 p.m. strikes. It sounds like Samuel and I are sleeping, and there is no way I'll agree to this." "Agreed," said Samuel. "I mean, I hate to be asleep by 12 p.m., and we missed the chance to catch Santa." An exasperated sigh followed these protests. On the match went until 9:15 p.m. It was a good thing the church choir had arrived to sing a Christmas carol, because the voices in the bedroom were getting a little raised. And if they got raised any longer, Mom would come upstairs and find her kids awake. The moment the church choir started playing music and singing "Deck the Halls," Annie rushed off the bed, pulling her brothers with her to the window to see them singing outside. As "Deck the Halls" played, about 20 women danced and fired snowballs at the men. The men ducked and danced and laughed, and some of them were even dressed up as elves. About 32 people dressed up as elves danced near the edge of the circle. Annie gasped. Out of nowhere 15 elves came running and started making a snowman. "I know," said Daniel, who had heard Annie's gasp. "Maybe those elves were hiding behind the church choir." A lady dressed as a reindeer switches the song from "Deck the Halls" to "Let It Snow." "You okay?" Daniel asked his brother, who stared out the window as though determined to run through it. Daniel and Annie stumbled back, because Samuel's next words came as a shock. He tells them he wants to join the Christmas carolers outside, because "Let It Snow" is his favorite Christmas song. Annie reacts before Daniel does. In a flash, She is at the door with her arms wide open as though to block him. Her intention was pretty clear. She was not going to let Samuel anywhere near the caroling. Samuel runs to the closet and throws on his elf costume that Fallon Nathaniel had gotten for him 2 years ago. He didn't seem to notice that it was too small for him. Samuel might be younger than Annie, but he's faster. He slipped under her blocking arms and wrenched the door open. Before either of them knew it, he was gone. Furious, tears welled up in Annie's eyes as she turned to Daniel. "Let's go and find him," she says. Daniel loves his brother. He will do anything for Samuel. But something told him that he and Annie should stay in the house and let Samuel come back in when the church choir left. Annie pulls Daniel to the door and says, "Come on. We need to find Samuel." Daniel quietly shuts the door and followed his sister downstairs. It was easier than he thought, and Mom didn't wake up, but something told him that he and Annie should stay in the house. Annie and Daniel had barely set foot in the snow when the song "Let It Snow" ended and the church choir claps. After one more song, the church choir leaves, and it's just Samuel dressed as an elf. Standing in the snow, Samuel sees his brother and sister walking toward him. Then he begins to walk toward his brother and sister. Soon they stopped in front of each other. As Samuel rang one of his jingle bells, he puts on a high squeaky impersonation of an elf. Daniel cracks up. Between laughs, Daniel chokes out, "I don't understand. How is the elf costume able to fit you? I thought you were too big for it." Samuel stares at his brother and says, "I just don't know. I guess I was determined to sing 'Let It Snow,' so I didn't care if it was big or small for me." Back in the bedroom, Annie climbs in her bed while Samuel and Daniel climbed into theirs. Samuel, Annie, and Daniel all simultaneously said "Happy Christmas." Then Samuel starts snoring. Daniel's eyes jumped more open than they had been an hour ago. If Samuel was asleep, could that mean Annie would be asleep shortly after? Annie looked down at Daniel. "I know what you are thinking. And no, I will not fall asleep." Annie climbs off her bed and onto Daniel and Samuel's bed. Daniel sits up. "So," Annie says with a grin, "what are we going to do to catch Santa?" Daniel sighed. He was cornered and he knew it, so he just told Annie, "Don't ask questions. Just sneak downstairs as quietly as you can to get Mom's phone. That's a part of the plan." To Daniel's great astonishment, Annie just nodded and slipped quietly downstairs without even asking a single question. 2 minutes later, she returned into the bedroom with Mom's phone. Annie sat on the bed as Daniel retrieved his wristwatch from under the bed. Finally, Daniel and Annie came to an agreement to throw the plan into action around 10:30 p.m. So the two waited and tried staying awake. By 10:15 p.m., Daniel was still awake. The only thing wrong with Annie is that her eyes were closed. But on the other hand, she was wide awake. It was kind of hard to see anything with their bedroom light turned off, and Daniel really couldn't see anything. His eyes drifted shut. He felt them. But he realized he had to stay awake to catch Santa. Daniel's shoulders sagged onto his bed. He realized he was home. He didn't have to catch Santa. Sleep was more important. But then a little voice asked, "Daniel, are you awake?" It was as though the voice was lurking in his subconscious mind. Because, "Daniel, are you awake? Daniel, are you awake?" echoed in his brain. Even though Daniel knew he was drifting into sleep, he couldn't ignore the hands rubbing against his chest gently, and the gentle voice saying, "Daniel, wake up." Daniel's eyes pop open, and he sits up slowly. "Did someone say something to me?" he said confusedly. The bedroom light pops on, and someone pulls Daniel's right hand up to his face, and Daniel squints, and his wristwatch it read 10:30 p.m. Daniel gasped so loudly he was surprised that Samuel didn't wake up. This was the time that he and Annie agreed to throw the plan into action. That meant Daniel couldn't sleep until the plan was done. After Daniel's gasp about the time recognition, the bedroom light clicks off. The bed creaks as Annie sits down next to him. Daniel swore under his breath, then turned to Annie to apologize. She said, "It is all right. I would have fallen asleep too," she added. "Let's see if this plan works." Daniel pockets Mom's phone because it's a part of the plan. He quietly shuts the door as the two of them slip quietly downstairs into a nightmare. Mom's snoring is so loud that Daniel doesn't need to talk in a whisper, but he can't exactly shout either, or else Mom would wake up. Daniel says carefully to Annie, "Let's go in the garage first." Finally, Daniel told Annie his plan by the time they got into the garage, and she freaked out about the part where Daniel has to use Fallon's old ladder. Annie was able to get the wooden brown box that contains Christmas decorations out of the house in like 2 minutes, but Daniel struggled with the ladder, shaking bits of snow out of her raven hair. Annie came inside to help Daniel with the ladder. The Christmas tree was like about 12 feet tall. but they almost knocked down the first two parts of the Christmas tree decorations. They barely set foot outside when Daniel dropped the ladder. It was cold, so he and Annie rushed inside to grab coats. Back outside on the porch, Daniel and Annie carried the ladder to the north side of the house. As Daniel climbed to the top of the ladder, snowflakes fell all around him. As he reached the top of the ladder, the roof of the house stared back at him. Daniel managed to grab enough snow on the roof to form it into a snowball, and threw it at Annie. Soon he and Annie were taking turns climbing up and down the ladder to decorate the house so it would be noticeable, and Santa couldn't miss it. By the time it was done, Daniel and Annie climbed down from the ladder and admired their work. Annie and Daniel rushed back inside to put the box and ladder back in the garage. As they climbed quietly back upstairs, Daniel told Annie, "Just wait. I think when Santa says ho ho ho, I think we will hear it." Annie and Daniel wished each other a happy Christmas before they climbed into their bunk beds. Even though Daniel didn't take a picture of how he and Annie decorated the house with Mom's phone, he still put it at the foot of the bed. Daniel dreamed that Samuel and Annie were still having their snowball fight and that he kicked Samuel and Annie's butts. As Samuel threw a snowball at Daniel, Annie suddenly pointed at the roof. "What is that?" Samuel and Daniel looked at what she was looking at. Was that a guy in a red suit? Samuel threw another snowball, but Daniel wasn't paying attention. The sound of bells ringing in the distance got his attention. Daniel sits up in a flash. That guy in the red suit. Those bells ringing in the distance. Was he forgetting something? Then it all came crashing down. If he wanted to catch Santa, he needed to wake Annie, and they both needed to get to work. Daniel didn't want to wake Samuel, because he had a feeling Samuel would be grumpy. Daniel listens again for the bells he heard in his dream. Sure enough, soft ringing echoes in the distance. There was no denying it. It was definitely him this time. After all the time they had been waiting, he was coming at last. It was finally their chance. Giving Annie a soft shake, Daniel says, "Come on. I think he is here." Daniel listened one more time. Sure enough, the sound of ringing bells mingled with the sounds of ho ho ho. When Annie didn't wake up, Daniel thought to himself, "All right, then she will miss the fun." Okay, that nightmare thing was a joke last time, but this time, when Daniel grabs Mom's phone and quietly goes downstairs, he heads into a nightmare. At the time he and Annie were decorating the house, he thought Mom's phone would be essential, but it wasn't. This time it was. Daniel looks around the house for a good hiding spot. Then he thought to himself, "There's not a good hiding spot. Maybe I should go." The realization made him stumble back. Once Daniel is done putting on a thick layer of warm clothes, he quietly, like a mouse, slips downstairs. He opens and shuts the back door. The ice-cold winds hit him even though he is covered in thick warm clothes. Daniel's teeth chatter as he walks into the frigid cold. He realizes as he puts one foot in front of the other, he won't at all enjoy this. The ho 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 and the ring 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 of the bells and Santa were getting closer and closer as Daniel realizes this is his big chance. At least, thought Daniel, if he builds a warm fort for him to hide in with his warm clothes, it gives him some protection from the cold. He begins to build the snow fort rapidly. Once Daniel crawls into his snow fort, he takes out Mom's phone and presses record, then swings it around. The whole house is videoed on Mom's phone. Through Mom's phone, Daniel saw with a gasp something flying toward the roof. It was flying very fast. There was a thud on the roof and Daniel's mouth fell open. On the roof was a sleigh. 8 tiny reindeer had been pulling the sleigh, and a man in a red suit jumped off the sleigh. Near the back of the sleigh was a sack, and Daniel knew what it was full of. It was full of toys. It was Santa. No denying it. Who else would have a black belt striped onto his red suit, a white beard, with a big grin, rosy cheeks, and a red hat with what seemed to have a snowball attached to it? Daniel stared at Santa through Mom's phone. He was reminded of how Samuel decorated the Santa on his cookie. The resemblance was so striking. Santa said something to Comet, one of his reindeer, but Daniel barely heard. He was too busy admiring the guy who delivered toys to all the children in the world. Just then another sleigh landed on the roof, and another Santa jumped off it. Both Santas were the same height and both had 8 tiny reindeers pulling their sleighs, and both had a sack full of toys. Daniel knew one of them had to be a fake, so he made up nicknames for them. Santa First and Santa Second. In total, there were 16 reindeer on the roof. All 16 reindeer glared at each other. "Hey," said Santa Second, lobbing a snowball at Santa First. "What are you doing here?" Santa First lobs another snowball in Santa Second's direction. "Why, I can't ask you the same question, can't I?" said Santa First. Both Santas glared as Santa First said, Well, I'm here to deliver presents to the children who made the nice list this year. Daniel definitely knew that Santa second was the fake, because he laughed and said, "These kids have made the naughty list this year? I'm here to steal their presents. Ha 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 ha." Even his laugh sounded evil. Santa first lobs another snowball at Santa second. "You ain't stealing these presents from these nice kids on my watch." Ignoring Santa first, Santa second yells, "Ho ho ho, Merry Bad Christmas, and bad night everyone." Santa first tries to distract Santa second. "So how is that sleigh working for you?" asked Santa first. It didn't seem to work. Santa second was already getting ready to go down the chimney. He did manage to answer Santa first's question. "Oh, I just copied your sloppy work on that sloppy sleigh." Santa first suddenly shouts, "Wait, I think we have an idea." Daniel couldn't believe what he said. "What is it?" snapped Santa second. "I am halfway down to get the presents. This is what Santa first says. We are going to have a snowball war. The one to win the war can do things their way." Santa second loves the idea of a snowball war, but he makes a point. "How are we going to know who is the winner?" Santa first says, "When we are done with the snowball war, which will last 2 minutes, whichever one of us gets hit with the snowflake first is the winner." Santa second was on board with the idea. The two got ready for the snowball war as they jumped off the roof and landed neatly in the snow. Daniel's heart leaps at the thought of recording an epic snowball war between the two Santas. "What if the snowflake lands on both of our heads?" Santa second declares. Santa first laughs. "Ha ha ha ha. That won't happen. Let us just have the snowball war by now. The war has begun." They both grabbed snow off the ground and mash it into snowballs and throw it at each other. Daniel had thought that Samuel and Annie had been the top snowball fighters, but when he saw both Santas going at it, he realized they were the champions at snowball fighting. It was a massacre. Snowballs flew in all directions, and Daniel could have sworn that one of them landed next to him from somewhere out of sight. One of the Santas gave a yell. A flashback showed Fallon telling his kids that if they stayed out in the cold long enough, they would get frostbite, and they could die from it. This was a nightmare on Christmas Eve, from Daniel staying in the cold for too long, one Santa being fake, and two Santas now fighting in their yard. 2 minutes after the snowball fight, the two Santas looked eagerly up into the sky, and a snowflake fell right onto the nose of Santa first. In angry, Santa second gets back on his sleigh. He looks back at Santa first and says, "Kids these days are hobos." Then he takes off into the night air. Santa first looks back up into the sky and bellows, "Ho ho ho, Happy Christmas," as Daniel stops recording. As Santa first goes back up to the roof, getting ready to go down the chimney, Daniel shakes the snow off of him and quietly rushes in with his mom's phone in his pocket. Daniel knew Fallon couldn't come back from the dead, but he still had an idea in mind to cheer Mom up as he stood by the chimney waiting. A second later, Santa falls out of the chimney and lands on his feet, wiping dust from his suit. Santa says, "Ho ho ho, why in the world?" Santa starts as he notices the small 9-year-old boy standing next to him. "And who might you be?" Santa says. Daniel tries to act confident. His plan had worked. He had caught Santa. "I am Daniel Nathaniel," he says confidently. "Ho ho ho, Merry Christmas, young lad," Santa says. "So would you like a snack?" Daniel asked. "Ho ho ho, oh that would be nice, young man." Daniel leads Santa over to the milk, cookies, and carrots. Santa dips a cookie in the milk and takes a bite, then finishes it. "How was it?" Daniel asks. Santa wipes his mouth on his sleeve and says, "Ho ho ho, that was excellent." As Santa finishes off the last of the cookies, Daniel nervously asked, "Santa, how do you know if a kid is on the nice list or naughty list?" "Ho ho ho, some of my elves keep watch for me when I am busy. Some people buy elves who are pretending to be toys and they monitor them." When Santa finishes off the last of the cookie, he drinks the rest of the milk. All that's left are the carrots. "Can you do me a little favor?" Daniel asks before he can wimp out. "Ho ho ho, and what might this favor be, young man?" asks Santa. Daniel asks Santa to use a little Christmas magic to cheer Mom up, so she wouldn't be as sad anymore. Santa didn't know what Mom was sad about, but he lays his hand on Daniel's shoulder and says, "Ho ho, ho, I'll see what I can do." Santa whispers words into a little crystal hung around his neck. Then when he is done, he tells Daniel, "That is my magic crystal. Hopefully she is more cheerful in the morning." Santa is like, well, about 5 or 6 feet taller than Daniel, but Daniel still gave him a hug and thanked him for trying. When he is done, Santa says, "Ho ho ho, you are welcome." Santa nearly smashes the plate as his big hand swoops in to snatch the rest of the carrots. Then he and Daniel walk over to the Christmas tree. Maybe Daniel should have noticed a bit earlier, but it was now that he noticed the sack on Santa's back. Are those some presents for me, my brother, and my sister? Daniel asked. Santa bends down and places the sack on the ground, and reaches in. He pulls out some presents and places them underneath the tree. Then Santa tells Daniel, "Ho ho ho, I hope they are." When Santa is done placing the presents underneath the tree, he puts the sack back onto his back. Smiling down at Daniel, Santa says, "Ho ho ho, I want you to go back upstairs and get a good night's rest. Merry Christmas, Daniel." Nathaniel. He and Santa shake hands. Then Daniel says goodbye one more time as he quietly goes back upstairs. Samuel and Annie woke up at 8, but Daniel woke up at 10:30 a.m. "Merry Christmas, sleepy brother," says Samuel, wrapping Daniel in a hug. The moment Daniel woke up, Samuel jumps back and screams, "Santa! What about Santa? We didn't catch him." Annie yawns from the doorway. "You look tired, Daniel. Have you been staying up all night?" she asked. "Well, Daniel stops and thinks about it. He realizes what it must look like to his brother and sister, who have slept through the whole event last night. They thought he slept through it too. Wait a moment, Daniel thought. I don't have to explain the complicated story about last night's event in the yard. They can just watch it unfold on Mom's phone. He wasn't going to tell Annie and Samuel this, so he said, "Let's go downstairs and check on Mom." Samuel and Annie traded looks, but they all headed downstairs. Mom was on the couch waiting for them. Daniel's heart gave a leap. Mom was grinning. She looked way happier than she had ever been since the death of Fallon. Santa's Christmas magic must have worked. They all wished each other a Merry Christmas. As Mom heads into the kitchen to cook a delicious Christmas breakfast, Annie grins. Who wants to have that snowball fight? Within a matter of seconds, they all had on thick layers of warm clothes, and they all rushed outside. "Whoa," Samuel says, grinning. "Is it just me, or does it look like someone had a fight out here?" Daniel didn't think the evidence of the fight between the two Santas would still be there, but it was. Half-crushed snowballs were everywhere, and a big hole was centered in the middle of it. I think we better be careful," says Annie, taking a tentative step forward. She trips over a snowball and falls into the snow. Daniel and Samuel helped pick Annie up, and she shakes some snow off her. "Yes," says Annie, "it does look like someone had a fight out here." It took them about 20 minutes to flatten all the snow, but by then, Mom was done with breakfast. That meant the snowball fight had been cancelled again. They all groaned about the snowball fight being forfeited again, but Mom's breakfast made up for it. After breakfast, Mom started looking for her phone. Daniel rushed upstairs and retrieved the phone. When he rushed downstairs, he gives it to Mom. Once Daniel handed over the phone, Melanie Nathaniel looked confused. "How did my phone end up in your bedroom?" she asked. Daniel swaps a quick look with Samuel and Annie, then tells Mom her phone was essential to the plan of trying to catch Santa. "Did it work?" asked Melanie Nathaniel. "No," said Daniel. He wants to surprise his mom because when she goes on her phone to look at her pictures and videos, she would see the video of last night's event. "Can I have your phone for a minute?" Daniel asked his mom. She hands it over wearing a dumbstruck look. Then she walks away. Daniel gives the phone to Annie. "Here, watch the video of what happened last night," he tells them. Ignoring the questions thrown at him, Daniel walks away. However, the questions don't last long as the video starts to do a replay. Daniel now stands over his crushed snow fort. He picks up snow off the ground, turns it into a snowball, and he aims it at the roof where Santa's second had been last night. Daniel grins with satisfaction as he watches the snow splatter against the roof. Daniel starts making snowballs, faster than both Santas had last night, and starts throwing them everywhere. Splat, 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 crack. Daniel grins at each one, hitting the windows, the roof, the bushes, and the trees. Splat, splat. 2 snowballs had just hit the windows when the back door opened. Samuel and Annie rushed outside, tripping over snow as they ran toward Daniel. They both flung themselves at their hero. "You caught Santa?" asked Samuel. "I should have been woken. You should have yelled for me to wake up," said a laughing Annie. Daniel tried to talk, tried to tell them it was nothing, but his brother and sister were hugging him so tight, and when Daniel tried squirming out, that didn't work either. When they finally let go, Samuel told Daniel, "You could have woken me up, you know. Why didn't you? We could have caught Santa together." "I thought you would be grumpy," Daniel said to Samuel. "What? Why would I be grumpy when you're waking me up to tell me it is time to catch Santa?" He had a point there now that Daniel looks back. Samuel had showed nothing but belief decorating Santa on that cookie, talking nothing but about him. Not to mention that pure determination to catch him, that was belief. Daniel turns to Annie. You just didn't want to wake up when I tried shaking you awake. I'm sorry though. It's all right, Annie says with a grin. But hey, says Samuel enthusiastically. A snowball formed in his hand. What's to stop us from having? He throws it in the air. That snowball fight. This has been an audio production of Twas the Nightmare on Christmas Eve by J.J. Flores. Audio hopes you enjoy this program.